Hello, everybody. I'm Trinity, and today we're going to be talking about me being pregnant at 14 years old when I was in 8th grade. The title is not clickbait of any kind. Yeah, I was pregnant a month and a half before my 15th birthday. I gave birth when I was 15 years old, and my daughter is about to be 24 years old now. So, first, I think to understand how something like that even happens, you have to understand that the stigma around it and the beliefs around teen pregnancy aren't what you think they are. A person that young can't consent. They don't know what they're doing. I've lived a life of a huge amount of stigma because of being pregnant at such a young age, and people assuming that, saying horrible things like you're a slut, you're a whore, all kinds of awful stuff, when the real truth is extremely far from that. I had a household that was very messed up and dysfunctional. My father was an alcoholic. My mother had an undiagnosed mental illness, and it was not really safe for me to be home. And as anybody who has any common sense knows, when you've got a young person without protection and shelter, they're going to be exploited by individuals that do have those things and are interested in taking what they can get from the young person. It's tragic. It happens amongst women, it happens amongst men, it happens amongst, or I should say, boys and girls, it happens gay and straight. It's very prevalent, much more prevalent than people realize is taking place, where you've got these older individuals preying on these younger individuals. In my case, I needed a place to be other than my home, and an individual who happened to have a car and happened to have a place for me to go pressured me into sleeping with them, and in exchange I wound up with a place to be. I didn't know what I was doing. I was 13 when all of it started. I mean, I knew I was young, but I remember on my daughter's 13th birthday looking at her and seeing how young she was and thinking to myself, my God, nobody could look at this child and think that this is a woman capable of consent. And I realized for myself, I think the first time I felt grief for the child that I was and that I never got to be because of the circumstances that I'd been in. It was a painful realization, but a healing realization, because I had blamed myself for all of it, all the way up through. And it wasn't until that moment when I realized that I was just a scared child that didn't know any better, that was just looking for safety and love. And I wound up being exploited instead. So, the way that it happened, I didn't know I was pregnant at the time, so this is how I found out I was pregnant. I had been, it was my 8th grade graduation, and we were going to a Six Flags theme park. And I went, and I spent the entire time miserable, feeling really sick, and I got a horrible sunburn that day. And shortly thereafter, I wound up with a bladder infection, which I thought I got from dehydration from the sunburn. Turns out, when I went to get the bladder infection and everything treated and taken care of, I found out that I was, in fact, pregnant. I went to a special home for girls that are pregnant and parenting, and I tried to continue my education there. It was a wonderful environment. I got to have parenting classes, classes on everything from cooking to house cleaning to you name it, things to help try to give me a crash course in preparing to go from being a literal child to having a child. It was a very difficult decision for me. I knew that I wasn't going to have an abortion. I knew that that was not an option for me, just in my heart and soul. But it was a difficult decision to decide whether I was going to keep my child or give her up for adoption. And in the end, I'd looked at a couple of families, and I had looked into adoption. And I made the decision to keep her. I made the decision to keep her because I knew that though I was young and though I didn't know what I was doing, nobody was going to love that baby. Oh, it makes me tear up thinking about it, sorry. Nobody was going to love that baby the way that I was going to love her. And I knew that I was willing to sacrifice anything and do anything to be a good mother and to give her a better life than the one that I had. So I went through my pregnancy, taking every class I could get my hands on in parenting and child raising. And the day finally came. I was 38 weeks pregnant. Now, you have to understand, let me back up a little bit. Because I was so young, my body was not prepared to carry a child. I went into preterm labor when I was only 28 weeks pregnant. I had to be in and out of the hospital on medications to stop the contractions. There was actually one point where they had me in a bed where I was up at an angle like this on these awful, awful drugs that made my whole body twitch to try and stop preterm labor, which luckily worked. I managed to carry all the way to 38 weeks, and I wound up going into labor that got stalled. Turns out that my water bag was too thick and it wouldn't break. So I was in labor for about 3 days, where my contractions were about 8 minutes, 5 to 8 minutes apart for 3 days, and I just could not progress. I was just stalled having these contractions. So, being the type of person that I am, I had gone to the hospital. I was dilated to 4 centimeters, which, for anybody that doesn't know, 4 centimeters dilated is supposed to be the point of no return, where if you're at 4 centimeters and you get stalled, they break your water, they do a C-section, they do whatever they have to so that you can give birth, because once you're that far dilated, you're not going to stop birth. You're just going to be stuck there. The problem is that the doctor that was going to break my water, she was going off shift, and the new doctor coming on had bigger hands. So when they came in and checked me, they decided, no, you're not really 4 centimeters, you're actually 3.5, and instead of breaking your water to progress your labor, we're going to send you home with these horrible contractions. So I went home with those horrible contractions. It went on for 3 days. I was staying at the facility where they do pregnancy and parenting, as I had stated, and I got desperate. The nurse practitioner that worked at the facility, she kept checking me and telling me anytime that water's going to break, and then finally she came in and she had this look on her face and she had checked me and she said, I really don't know when that water's going to break. I'm really sorry. You've got a really thick bag of waters. I really wish they had just broken your water for you. Then this would all be over with. And I started thinking, So after she left the room, I got ballsy and desperate after 3 days with no sleep of being in labor, and I broke my own water. Something that was terrifying, and looking back, I wouldn't recommend anybody else to do something like that. It was scary and potentially stupid, but what do you expect out of a 15-year-old? Either way, I felt at the time like I had no choice. So my water is broken, and I went into something called violent labor, where the contractions come and they don't stop. In other words, most labor, you've got contractions like I had before my water was broken, where, they're 5 minutes apart, 3 minutes apart, 2 minutes apart, and on they go. After I broke my water, the contraction didn't stop. One started, and it stayed at a peak, and it stayed there for 3 hours. And I went from 4 centimeters dilated to delivered in 3 hours. Technically, I think it was 2 hours and 55 minutes was how that worked out. And I remember when I got to the hospital, there was an orderly there, and they had looked at me and saw how young I was, and they looked at my birth coach who was with me, and they just had this awful look on their face, and they said, "How young is this one?" And my birth coach said, just kind of stunned, looked at him and said, "She's young." And the look of disgust that was on that orderly's face was something that I've never forgotten. And it was something that I vowed that I was never going to let my children feel, to be in that situation where they were in a situation that was outside of their control, that they were frightened and alone, and being looked at like that. So up we went upstairs, and it was time to give birth very quickly. My mother managed to make it to the hospital just in time before the birth. And I pushed for about 15 minutes, and out she came. She was perfect and beautiful. She was small because I was small, but she was strong and healthy, and her lungs were great. And they put her in my arms, and I knew. I knew I was going to spend the rest of my life dedicated to that little being that they put in my arms. And that's exactly what I did. Um, I wound up getting my GED, going to work. I tried to go to school. A bunch of other insane things have happened to me over the course of my life that I'm not going to get into in this video. Um, I had to make a lot of hard decisions to keep my promise to my child that she would have a better life. But she's 24, and neither her nor my other children, they have not been sexually assaulted. Nobody was on drugs, nobody got pregnant, they didn't grow up in a home full of abuse. My children had the best that I could give them. Would I recommend to anyone getting pregnant as a teenager? No. My life has been incredibly hard. And I have had to pay a very high price for the choices, I guess if you can call them choices, that I had to make with what I had to work with at those ages, and with the resources that I had and the information that I had available to me. But do I regret my children? No. My children are everything to me. They're my life. And I don't know what I would do without them. In fact, that's a big part of what's been so difficult for me these last couple of years. My children are all grown up. They've moved out. And I am kind of left here not knowing what to do with myself. And the depression has been so much worse. I've lost motivation to do anything. And it's just been really hard going from devoting your whole life to something to not having that thing in your life anymore. I mean, my children are still in my life, obviously, but they're gone. They've moved out. So it's been very difficult, but I think it's good for me. I'm young enough where I've still got my whole life ahead of me, and it is now time for me to start learning who I am and start learning what I like, what I don't like, what I want to do, what I don't want to do, who I really am. Because all of those things I never got to learn. When you have a child, no matter what age you are, who you are stops. You dedicate everything to that little living being, which is why you're supposed to have your life together and be a complete human being before you have children. Because after you have children, everything is about them. Everything is for them. And if you're not doing that, you're not doing parenting correctly. In my case, because I didn't have it together, I didn't know who I was, my children paid the price for that. Like I said, I mean, I succeeded in making sure that they were raised better than I was raised, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't without some serious flaws. There's so many things that if I could go back and know what I know now, then, that I would have done so differently. I would have. But I've got a good friend who recently was telling me, hindsight is 2020. You can't spend your life living in guilt and regret over things that you did the best you could at the time. All you can do is take what you know now and do the best you can with it going forward. And I think that's some really good advice, though it's been really hard for me. So I just want to say, especially to anybody that's young, that's out there, though this channel is definitely not for young people, but if you know somebody that's young, or if you happen to be young and you're in a situation where you don't have safety and you don't have protection, beware. If you've got older individual offering you this love and affection and safety and protection, it's a lie. It is not what you think it is. I mean, unless it's a parental type figure that's giving it to you, but I'm speaking if they want sex in return. It is not what you think it is at that age. It is not a miracle. It is not a relationship. You're not in love. You're being exploited. And whether you know it or not at the time, once you grow up, the trauma from that, you're going to have to pay for. It's going to cost you dearly later on. Because the fact is, statutory rape laws exist for a reason. You're too young to consent. That means that you don't know what you're doing and you are getting yourself into a situation where, I hate to say getting yourself, you're not. You're being put in a situation where you're being raped. Statutory rape is rape. And it's important, I think, for people to understand that. I can't begin to tell you the issues that I have over the things I experienced when I was young and the exploitation that I experienced when I was young. And those issues passed on to my children. And those issues may even wind up being passed on to my grandchildren because of the awful situations that I was in. So if you want to know what it's like to be pregnant at 14 years old, just imagine yourself naked, alone, afraid as a child, with no protection, nowhere to go, and then being asked to take care of another human being while you're in that state. That's what it's like to be in that place. So please do not be too judgmental on teen mothers and teen parents, because they've got enough of a burden on them, and it's not fair to place these adult expectations and these adult judgments on these literal children. So, yeah, that's basically it. That's what I wanted to talk about today. If you ever have any questions about it, please put them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer anything that you want to ask. And I guess that about covers it. So please practice safe sex, be aware of predators and the signs that someone is trying to prey upon you, and be safe. And I wish you well. Like, share, subscribe, all the fun stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.